Hello, friends. Welcome back to another edition of our weekly NBA Insider video live stream notebooks right here on the one and only Bleacher Report app and on YouTube as well. My name is Jake Fischer, your resident NBA insider for all things Bleacher Report, and we are coming to you live Tuesday, December 30th, 5 p.m. Eastern Time. The sun is setting on New York City. It is setting on 2025, and it could be setting on Trae Young's time as the franchise face of the Atlanta Hawks. I think if we want to narrow it down to that particular part of the conversation, I think we're already at that point. The moment that Atlanta and Trae Young both mutually agreed to not move forward in proceeding to sign him to a contract extension this past summer that allowed him to go into this 25-26 campaign with the option to opt out of his player option for next season and become a free agent. That was the first time in Trae Young's partnership with the Hawks where he was no longer a set it and forget it max contract player with this franchise, the guy who was the straw that was stirring this drink and who was the North Star and the franchise face. You know, last year, it was an up and down year for this franchise with a lot of guys in and out of the lineup. Jalen Johnson, though, was starting to show some signs early of being this next iteration of the Hawks centerpiece. And this year, even though he's currently out right now with another little malady, Jalen Johnson has fully emerged as the piece that Atlanta is building around, and that I know people in that front office are wondering who, whatever potential move they make, whether it were to be Anthony Davis or if they wanted to conceptually get involved in any potential Giannis Antetokounmpo sweepstakes, if he were to come available, they're asking themselves, how do anyone that we could potentially target on the trade market, how do they fit with Jalen Johnson, not Trae Young? So that's certainly put a lot of rival teams on notice and has a lot of league executives wondering whether or not we're going to see possibly a Trae Young trade between now and the February 5th trade deadline. This is also 100% a recent reaction to the fact that with Trae Young back after a little bit of an absence himself, the Hawks have now lost 7 straight games. If they were winning, if they were 500, I don't think this would be such a conversation right now that it's starting to become around the NBA. But the fact of the matter is, dropping 7 straight games, falling down to the 10 seed in the Eastern Conference, and giving the Milwaukee Bucks some hope that they can leapfrog them and really reemerge as a legitimate contender in the playoff picture in the East, that's got everyone around the league looking at a potential Trae departure, especially because he could just opt out and decide to test the open market. I don't think he will. I think if you polled a bunch of cap strategists around the NBA right now, they would say and advise that Trae Young needs to pick up that option because he's going to struggle to find $49 million on the open market based off of where his play and his consistency have been right now. But this is something we're absolutely going to be monitoring for the foreseeable future. Sport Watcher said Hawks losing Trae would be an L. It would certainly be a major, major change for this franchise. And they were hoping, I know that Hawks people, decision makers there, were hoping that he'd come back in this last month and they'd really get to see him orchestrating with Jalen Johnson healthy, with Dyson Daniels coming off a most improved player campaign that also hasn't really amounted to much in the last little stretch. I mean, the struggles from 3-point shooting have been a true disaster for everything after what a positive campaign was for him a year ago. But for now, we're looking at where and who could potentially get involved in a Trae Young sweepstakes. And K Polk wants to know if I see the Bucks going after Trae to help Giannis. And it's a fair question because I think the Bucks are looking at quite literally everybody. If they're not selling Giannis and they're looking to be buyers, they have to canvass the entire league to try to figure out what potential addition they could add. And the smaller type moves would be flipping Kyle Kuzma and his $22 million for somebody, or combining him and Bobby Portis. And that can get you into the conversation of guys like Zach LaVine, who we reported here at Bleacher Report, Jeremy Grant, who we've reported in the past. DeJounte Murray is definitely expected to be available for trade once he returns for New Orleans. And he's someone that the Hawks have looked at time and time again. Trae Young would fit a very similar mold to what Damian Lillard did in Milwaukee next to Giannis. It didn't obviously work out that well. They had this wave and stretching to bring in Miles Turner, but you have to think that Milwaukee is considering that. I just don't know if it'd be worth all the salary to stagger up to get to him. I see Milwaukee more shopping around the $35-38 million ballpark for player contracts as opposed to having to gut multiple guys from their rotation. Tree Rio says trade to Charlotte for LaMelo. And then I see someone else saying Trae for Ja. And I think that's definitely something that we have to be prepared for here, in that dating back to Russell Westbrook for John Wall, that big Houston Wizards deal from years past. A lot of times you need to move these guys for other albatross contracts or all-stars on proverbial super overpay deals. And that's definitely something that people around the league are preparing for and looking at. I don't think that Charlotte is really so keen on moving LaMelo at this juncture, like we've talked about in the past. They also were rolling a little bit. They lost to Milwaukee last night, but they won a couple straight. They finally had LaMelo, Concanipple, and Brandon Miller back all together, and then Con went out on the floor. So I'm not fully expecting that yet. Johnny says on YouTube, my trade: Young to Sacramento, AD to Atlanta, Sabonis to Dallas. I don't know what Dallas's appetite would be for Sabonis right now, to be honest. That's not something I've looked at. I think for Sacramento, the issue there would be, does Trae Young want to pick up that option and stay? Are you sending theoretically some type of asset in Zach LaVine or Sabonis out the door to pick up a player who could test the open market and leave? That'd be a risk, I think. Let's get back to our scheduled programming here before re-engaging the chat, because there was some AD stuff in that Hawks 3-team deal. And I do think that Atlanta, as we've reported in the past, as my colleague Mark Stein wrote about on our joint Substack effort, the Stein line the other day, the Atlanta Hawks are definitely a team that's monitoring Anthony Davis, and they are one of many teams around the league who fully believe that Dallas is going to be willing to listen to any and all trade offers for Anthony Davis. The issue is, while Giannis is hanging in the periphery and the Bucks are still looking at being a potential buyer and calling on guys like Zach LaVine and Jeremy Grant, like we just talked about, I think a lot of teams are going to hold their powder for making a real legitimate offer for Anthony Davis, because they want to potentially hold those draft assets, whatever young pieces they could put out the door for Giannis if and when he were to become available, either before the trade deadline or next summer. Now, I'll say this. In my conversations around the league so far, even this week, I definitely am getting the sense that most people right now, it's early, we still have 5+ weeks to go before the deadline, but most people right now are operating with the assumption that both Giannis and AD would probably more likely than not be sticking around their teams and potentially just have their trade situations be resolved in the summer. Because, especially for Giannis, that's when teams that would be happy to buy will have access to more draft capital, and there's just greater flexibility from a salary matching standpoint where teams can carry up to 20 players on their roster. For one particular example, Miami, whether it's going for after AD or Giannis, hypothetically, the Heat only have access to 2 first-round picks right now to trade. Come June 30th at 6 p.m. Eastern time, when the calendar flips to the 26-27 season, Miami already has access to 4 first-round picks, 2 additional picks. So there's just a greater likelihood, I think, of a deal for either of these guys happening in the summer, especially if you want to bring it particularly to AD. The teams I've talked to and I've talked about, from Toronto to Chicago to Dallas, who have checked in on Anthony Davis, they all are looking at potentially getting him in a buy low scenario. And the Mavericks are not selling him for anything shorter than what is relatively going to be the peak of his value right now when healthy after a long stretch of games. I see Just Be Chillin' in the chat wants to know my thoughts on AD for Giannis. Dallas would certainly be very interested in that scenario, but I don't think that's really the move that Milwaukee would want to do at this juncture. I think if Milwaukee's moving on from Giannis inevitably, I think they're going to be moving far more towards what big blue chip prospect, what absolute haul of draft capital can you get? You don't want to downgrade in talent and upside from a 32-year-old from a 32-year-old to another 32-year-old if you're finally swallowing the tough pill and moving on from Giannis. I just don't see that happening. Any realistic Celtics potential deals? A. Harris wants to know. The Celtics are definitely looking at big men. That is something that's come up multiple times from rival teams that I've been consulting with. And they have one real outgoing salary trade chip that they can look at to do so, and that's Anthony Simons. It'll be difficult, I think, for Boston to find a center that is a really close salary match that also goes down in salary for Boston without them having attached too much draft capital to Simons, because he's not really considered a positive contract right now. We've talked about this a lot over the weeks here on our show. The bench scorer, the hybrid combo guard who's not very big, who's not a major defensive weapon, the Malik Monks, the Norman Powells, even though Powell's playing phenomenally, it has been all year in Miami, Cam Thomas, those types of guys are not really valued right now in the NBA. So Boston's going to have, I think, a tricky path to turning Simons' money into a big man, but that is what we keep hearing they are looking to do. Zonta wants to know, is Kawhi tradable? And after a 55-point career-high effort the other night that helped Kawhi secure Western Conference Player of the Week honors, I think there's even more of a position right now in Los Angeles, in Clipperland, than there was a couple days ago or last week when we came to you and said that the Clippers were not willing right now to listen to James Harden trade offers. And I don't think they want to for Kawhi Leonard right now either, because now they've won 4 straight games. And they're, don't look now, 3 games out of the play-in tournament, which is still so far, far away from where Los Angeles thought they'd be this year. They really thought on their range of possible outcomes with Bradley Beal healthy and with Brook Lopez in town and some more internal development that they were going to be right in the thick with Golden State and Phoenix and this other crew of teams right behind the top tier contenders in the Western Conference. They thought they'd be able to get into the playoffs and make some noise. I still think they think that. I still believe the Clippers are going to hold out onto hope that if Kawhi and James Harden are healthy, if they have a relative other string of health down their aging roster, they have, I think if they're not the oldest, they're the damn near oldest team in the league, that they still can compete in the Western Conference. It could be a nightmare for any team in a 7-game series. So I don't think that I'm expecting real trade chatter for Kawhi or Harden right now. But again, February 5th is 5 weeks away, and this can turn on a dime. If the Clippers start losing a bunch more games, I think it's very fair to consider that Los Angeles should look at selling off their guys to get some type of future capital, even though this pick is owed to Oklahoma City. But that pick being already gone and out the door as a vestige of that Shai Gilgeous-Alexander Paul George trade, there really is no incentive for the Clippers to tank right now and get their pick. Which on the flip side, if you want to go back to Atlanta for a second, the Hawks actually do have some type of benefit in theory. The more they lose games, there is some intrigue. There has to be some intrigue, being that the Hawks are going to control the most favorable of their own pick, the Bucks pick, and New Orleans. And maybe they could have 3 cracks at the number 1 pick in what's considered a very loaded draft if they do get there. The Clippers, though, I don't really see them having a North Star of losing games. I think they want to keep Kawhi and James Harden. They want to also preserve cap flexibility in 2027 and go from there. I'm going to go back to the chat for a moment here. Truck M says, or wants to know if Detroit is going to trade to help Cade Cunningham. And I see someone asking about MPJ as well. James Harden is someone that I've seen a couple of people online and I've heard over the phone some team people suggesting would be a good piece for Detroit to go add. I think that type of move is going to be too much. The Pistons have signaled repeatedly that they are not looking to expedite their process, this really fun young rebuild that they've kind of stumbled into behind Cade. And they were not expecting to be the first seed in the Eastern Conference after a fun run to the sixth seed a year ago. A more middle tier move, flipping Tobias Harris and Duncan Robinson for something would be interesting, but I'm not right now hearing much about the Pistons, and I'm not asking about the Pistons too much because they again have repeatedly said they're not looking to push their chips too far into the middle here. They don't want to overreact. They want to be patient, even though they have had a ton of success. King T wants to know, will Herb Jones and Trey Murphy be on the Pels past the trade deadline? That's a question that the Lakers are certainly wanting to know as well. For now, the Pelicans have continued to signal that they don't want to be sending either of those guys out of the Smoothie King Center, even though they've lost 4 straight games again. That's going to be another dynamic, I think, where we wait as we get closer and closer and closer to February 5th. What type of offers come in and how aggressive will certain teams be to try to pry away one of those guys? That'll probably be the difference maker in conjunction with how poor the Pelicans look. I'm definitely expecting DeJounte Murray to be available for trade if and when he comes back, and that should be happening in the next couple of weeks. Is this a reasonable deal? Jay from the A is asking. Trading Trae Young for a role-playing point guard and a big man and a pick. I don't think you're trading Trae Young right now at a value where you're getting a pick back. That's just, I think, a pretty clear-cut answer at this point in time. Swift Moon says, I think most people underestimate how unlikely the Bucks will trade Giannis is. We've been saying it over and over and over again. The Bucks have no plans to trade him right now. They are looking to be buyers, and they're going to keep their heels dug into the sand until he requests out formally, and he has shown no signs of doing that either. Kenny says AD for the Hawks 2020, I'm going to guess that means 2026 number 1 pick. And the Hawks have given every indication that they are not willing to move that number 1 pick they got back from the Pelicans in the Derek Queen trade this year. They are very excited for the chance of getting a crack at the number 1 pick in a very loaded draft coming up in June. Gail Xander wants to know, are the Cavs looking to make a move? I think the Cavs are right in this bucket. And that's something I think we can transition to our next topic here, because my expectation right now with the trade deadline, and maybe this is bad for business, but I don't think we're going to see a lot of moves in the near future. I think there's going to be, I was just talking to a GM about this yesterday. Everyone is so bunched up in the standings. If you pull up the standings right now, we talked about what the Clippers only being a couple of games out of the 10 seed. If you look at the Bucks right now at 11th out of the play-in picture in the East, they're only 4 games out of 6. They're only 5 games out of the 5 seed. And there's so many games packed in January. January is one of the more condensed months of the season where teams are going to have 15, 16 games roughly on average. That is a massive sample size, almost a fifth of the entire year, where teams are going to be able to really figure out where they are in these standings. And they're so bunched up. Everyone is so injured. I just keep hearing on the phone that a lot of these teams want to see and wait where they stand come end of January, come early February, before they make any type of real directional decision on what path they're going to do. And I'm not just talking about whether they're going to be a buyer or a seller, but whether you want to go after a guard or a big man, whether you want to make a seismic move where you're sending out $30 million in salary, or if you're just trying to get someone more around the mid-level exception at $15 million. Some teams are just going to figure out whether or not they want to duck the luxury tax or not. And I think Cleveland is right there with that crop of teams that wants to figure out exactly where they are before they get to real deal cracking time closer to February 5th. So Cleveland, I think, is going to be open. And I know from talking to someone there very recently, they're going to be very open for business if things continue to be very mediocre at best, but I think it's still very early in Cleveland's decision making right now. Hadimo wants to know Westbrook Kings news. The most King stuff we keep hearing is that the Bucks are interested in Zach LaVine. That's really it. I haven't heard much on Russell Westbrook right now. They obviously have Malik Monk available for trade, and I saw ESPN reported the other day that he's another guy that Milwaukee's looking at. That wasn't so surprising to me. We keep hearing the Kings do still have interest in Jonathan Kuminga, but that would likely end up having to be some type of three-team scenario where the Warriors reroute whatever package they got back from Sacramento for that 22-year-old swingman because they're not interested in Malik Monk. Adidas for Life wants to know, did the Bulls get rid of Vucevic? I think Chicago is another team that they do this every year, though, so it shouldn't really come as a surprise. But they're 15-17 after starting 6-0, and the reality is, just like Milwaukee, just like Atlanta, just like Cleveland, they're only a couple games out of fourth in the East. So I think Chicago and how aggressive they will be on either end of the spectrum, from a selling standpoint, from a buying standpoint, that's going to be very much determined by how they fare over their next 15 games, which again are all coming in January. Most teams are playing almost every other night once the calendar flips to 2026. That January month before the All-Star break is where everyone just has so many games. You got a lot of teams playing 5 games in 7 nights and what have you. And I think Chicago, they're going to really wait and be as patient as possible, as they always are, to figure out whether to sell Vooch, whether to push some pieces in. You know, you've heard them as a team that's looked at Anthony Davis and Sabonis and what other pieces could they get involved with. They've had interest in Jonathan and Kuminga in the past. So we'll see where the Bulls end up factoring in all this. Smith AP wants to know Monk and Ellis, that's Malik Monk and Keon Ellis, to the Lakers. I think the Lakers would love Keon Ellis, but right now the asking price I keep hearing for Keon Ellis is a first-round pick, and I don't think the Lakers, with their sparse draft capital, are going to think that Keon Ellis is worth one of their few first-round picks available. Joshua on YouTube is asking, any chance the Suns look to buy? I haven't heard anything on Phoenix right now, to be quite honest. They have been pretty quiet. I would think that they're probably not so eager to mortgage any future assets to really improve. But if they could flip some things around, that I think they're more of a seller. We keep hearing that Nick Richards is someone that they're looking to part with. So that's my expectation right now for the Suns, that they're looking more at still keeping their books fresh and optionality alive after getting out of the second apron hell that they were in with Kevin Durant and Bradley Beal. And I think of Phoenix as more of a seller with Nick Richards than anything else. J. Perry wants to know, do I think the Pacers will actually make a trade for a center or stay where they are? The Pacers are definitely looking for big men. They are definitely looking for big men, whether that's going to be a major coup and getting like their center of the future next to Tyrese Halliburton, or just someone who's more of a mid-tier guy, like a Jonathan Isaac who'll be available. I don't know that to be definitive about it right now, but they're definitely looking for big men. Another team that we're definitely expecting will look for big men moving forward because they don't have their center of the future is the Los Angeles Lakers. But an injury to Austin Reeves, a calf that's going to keep him out for the next month, is certainly going to impact all of Los Angeles' decision-making. We've been hearing that the Lakers are looking at 3-and-D wing upgrades in season right now. But I think the Lakers could be front and center of any potential big man developments come this offseason, because DeAndre Ayton will only have 1 year left. And as well as he's played there, I don't think the Lakers ever really looked at Ayton as a long-term answer at center like they did once upon a time with that big Mark Williams trade that got rescinded after they failed his physical. So I think you're still going to look for them in the summer to be that type of aggressive team after they keep Austin Reeves back. That's a question that a lot of people ask when you talk about trades in the point guard market right now. Do you think the Lakers would move Austin Reeves? Do you think he's going to be available? But I'd say the overwhelming consensus remains that Reeves is going to want to stick around in LA, and vice versa, that the Lakers are going to want to keep their undrafted guard that they discovered and developed and turned into a borderline all-star and one of the best bucket getters in the league right now. But I think ultimately they are still primarily focused at this juncture at trying to find 3-and-D wings that can slot between Luka and Austin Reeves and LeBron James when they're all healthy and back and marching towards a playoff run come February. But look, with Reeves being out for a month, with Nikola Jokic being out for a month, and all those games to be played in January, like we just talked about, the Western Conference standings are going to be very, very fluid. And the further the Lakers could theoretically fall with Reeves out the door, or just out and sidelined, excuse me, for a little bit here, I do wonder if that could potentially scale back the Lakers a true regression on the trade market, because I really think it's going to take the just perfect right player for them to even put a first round pick on the table right now. And I think they'll be a little more conservative in terms of going after 3-and-D wing help if they don't see themselves as a clear cut contender just one piece away. And if they're not, floating right in that pack behind OKC and San Antonio, I just wonder what that could do in terms of scaling back their aggression on the trade market. Let's get back to the chat here. Swift Moon says, who do I think will be the biggest name moved? Which is a really good question because we keep talking about guys that we think might not be, right? We think Giannis might not be. We think Anthony Davis might not be. For Trae Young to get moved, it's going to take the right situation for both sides there. The biggest name that could get moved, I mean, it could be Michael Porter Jr. I've definitely got more calls to make on that subject, but he has absolutely rehabbed himself into a positive trade asset right now in the market. And I watched him go off for another 25-plus point game in Barclays Center last night at Golden State. He could easily, he's a big name. He could easily be the biggest name to be moved. Would Jeremy Grant count as a big name? Sam Clam wants to know, do I see Portland making any moves? They need shooting. I definitely keep hearing that the Blazers are more willing to move Jeremy Grant than they have been in the past. So would he count as a big name? He's kind of obviously past his prime and the peak of his powers, but he's someone who was an all-star candidate in the past. Sam OG wants to know, what do I see New York doing? They've always been, for the last little stretch here, dating back to the summer, connected to point guards. With New York, I'm curious, though, if Tyler Kolwick's play forces them to look more at center upgrades, someone to have in the stable, in the bullpen, behind Cat, behind Mitch Robinson, because Gershon Yabusele just has not been that after being a pretty key free agent signing this past summer. Are the Heat active at all? OU wants to know. Haven't heard much on the Heat right now in terms of active and what they're really, proactively trying to achieve. But I think Miami is definitely right there with any team waiting to see whether or not Giannis is going to become available, whether now or in this summer. Chuck AP says, can we trade for anyone from the Lakers to the Pelicans? Usually it's the other way around. Usually it's Lakers fans wanting to know if Trey Murphy and Herb Jones are available. I don't know why the Pelicans would be wanting to go buy people from the Lakers right now, but I do understand why To the Moon is saying CP3 to the Pelicans, because Chris Paul, of course, remains absent from Los Angeles, and he could be away from the team all the way up until the February 5th buzzer. I have not heard that the Pelicans are interested in him, but it would be a nice homecoming, and he could be a real veteran mentor to the young point guard Jeremiah Fear, so that would be interesting. And our final chat here right now, Burning Beetle says he loves Reeves, but he plays no defense. Needs to be traded with Luka, not enough D. That is the one situation that I think any detractor in Los Angeles talks about. Can that defensive pairing between Luka and Austin Reeves hold up long term? I think ultimately that's not a question the Lakers are truly asking right now, because the reality is Luka and Austin Reeves together are two of the top free throw merchants and scorers in the league. And from a marketability standpoint, Luka came in number one in first fan all-star voting returns. Austin Reeves came in at 10th, right behind LeBron. They've got these two guys who are absolute stars. I can tell you from my time over in Manila during the 2023 World Cup, Austin Reeves was arguably the biggest star who drew the biggest crowd reaction of anyone over there. So he's got all-star potential. He's right there knocking on the door. Luka is going to clearly be in there. I think it's interesting in this early return that LeBron has kind of stumbled. We're not seeing him in that perennial top spot where he was year after year, especially, in those years where the top vote getter from each conference got to draft guys. So I thought that was very noteworthy that LeBron fell out of the top 5. Also interesting in this early return that Tyrese Maxey up at number 2. He's clearly emerged as a perennial all-star and the new face of Philadelphia. But to be the second leading vote getter in the entire Eastern Conference, just behind Giannis and behind Jalen Brunson, who has had a hell of an MVP caliber season playing in New York, obviously a bit of a bigger market than Philly, and someone that Knicks fans are just fully behind. For Maxey and Brunson both to blow Cade Cunningham and Donovan Mitchell out of the water in fan voting just goes to show how those smaller jitterbug guards that I think are more, pedestrian sized, fans see themselves in those guys, and they bring an exciting brand of basketball to the Atlantic Division. It'll be interesting to see how people react to this first voting that came out. I don't think it's not coincidental that it came out yesterday, the 29th, and then today, the 30th, was another one of those days where your vote counts 3 times as much. So if you want to get your guy in the All-Star game, pay attention to those days. I don't have them in front of me, but look it up on any search platform of your choice. The days where your vote counts 3 times as much, like today was one of them, that is a real way that can swing this All-Star voting for this year. That's going to do it for today's show. We really appreciate everyone who got in the chat and asked questions on a loaded number of topics. We are going to come back to you next week live next Tuesday in 2026, about a month away from the trade deadline. That will be January 6th, a little under 1 month away from February 5th. Hopefully we'll have some more news and notes for you guys. But for now, we really appreciate you tuning in and tapping in as always. And we hope you have a great New Year's festivities wherever you choose to do so. See ya. Take care.